let's fast forward now. January 23rd, 1997. I'm a hell-raising, honky-tonkin', womanizing idiot. And I end up in Louisiana on the banks of the Washita River with a Tuesday night men's group from the West Monroe, with the Whites Ferry Road Church of Christ in West Monroe, Louisiana. And I'm sitting there with all these guys with big beards on the banks of the Washita River, and thinking these guys look kind of scary, but they're all really cool. And Jace Robertson from the Duck Dynasty Robertsons came up and sat down next to me and asked me if I'd solved my death problem, which is that's how a Church of Christ starts that conversation. But I was baptized that night, and again, my life changed again, because I knew that the me that I egoically built needed to go away.
Right.
He did. So you want to talk about Mimosa doing something good and being part of the path? That was it for me.
Yeah.
But the cool part of this story happens about 2 years later. I get invited to go duck hunting with Phil Robertson and the rest of them, which is, if you're a redneck, that's a dream. And yeah, so.
Oh my gosh, that's funny. Oh gosh.
So it's pre-dawn. It's getting up way earlier than I ever wanted to. I'm in the duck blind drinking coffee that's at the time was way too strong to drink, but I got it down somehow. Now it's out to drink coffee. And Phil and I had this conversation already about, he produced these duck hunting videos and they use really bad, he described it as really bad porn music from Nashville.
Gosh.
That they had to pay for. He goes, "You're a songwriter. Can you write us some songs about hunting that we can use in our videos?" And I said, "Well, probably." I said, "That's how I got invited." I said, "I've never been duck hunting." He said, "Well, we'd fix that." So I'm sitting there in the duck blind. Phil makes coffee, says a prayer, and I raised my head from the prayer and looked through the swamp at the sun rising, and it was just the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in my life. And in that moment, the song I wrote, that's probably an anthem to all duck hunters around the world, called "The Life of a Duck Man," was dropped into me from the Father.
Wow.
And I looked down at Phil and I said, "I just wrote the first song, Phil." He said, "Conover, you're weird." And I said, "Yeah, I get it." He goes, "How did you just write a song?" I said, "Well, I can't explain that." And that's, I have a real hard time writing. I have friends in Nashville, and because they'll sit around and like construct a song, and I'm like, they're still working on the first couple lines, and I'm like, "I got it. Y'all want to hear it?" Like, and they get mad. It's like, "That's not how we do it." And I'm like, "Well,
when it's ahorita,
right." So
that's what it is.
But it's also MILTHA.
Yes.
So
they go hand in hand.
Yeah, I can't explain to you how the thoughts, feelings, and emotions of God, Allah, are dropped into us all the time if we're open. But I can play you lots. I can play you songs that are MILTHA.
That's right.
Their music, their words. There was a video in my head. There was, it was a creation, was literally dropped through me, and it comes out through a guitar in this hole in my face. That's MILTHA.
Right.
That's all I got. I can't. There are no words, especially English.
Well, it's why, like, right. For me, when I look at these beautiful Aramaic words and Hebrew words, because they're masculine and feminine in nature, and they're meant to be, because in order for creation to come into pass, to become, to be, to come to pass, Haya, there has to have the male and female energy. I mean, that's really, we see that in nature. We see it in our own families. It takes a man and a woman to create new life. And so it would be the same in spirit. It has to be the same in spirit in order for those things to manifest here in a slow down vibratory nature. And when I look at Milta, Mem Lamed in Hebrew means to fill, right? And then Tav is a letter that represents the end or represents covenant or signature or frequency of completion.
Yep.
And then it's with the Aleph. And there's a word that's Tav Aleph in Hebrew, and it has to do with it's like it's a room, it's a place that's like guarded, like a storehouse. And so when you have MILTHA and you have this places that is guarded and this area that is set apart as an enclosure, you're filling up the enclosure, which is us, right? And it's the covenant of oneness, the mystery of the many who are one. And so when Milta comes forward, it's this place that is set apart. It's something that can be accessed by those who tap into that signature frequency of that covenant that is producing oneness. And so as soon as you tap into there, then you take the Orita, which has got this light frequency of creation, and you have the masculine and the feminine energy coming in, and you can't help but have something new birthed, something that is spontaneous, something that hasn't been heard or seen before, because it's coming from the place of creation. So that vibration continued to go forward, that is drawing those to come into the place of Milta, to come into the Orita.
In 2 Corinthians, I think it's 5, I think. That's behold a new creation.
Right.
Is literally what's happening there.
Exactly.
It's something that has never existed before. And of course, the masculine religion wants to repackage that and say, oh, that's you when you agree to what we say. You're a new creation. And I'm like, no, that's not what it is. But you know, but that's every time I hear somebody talk about the masculine and the feminine, I think about what religion is, because people say, you're saying religion is bad. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm just saying it's when you just take the masculine and run with it, you have no idea what you're leaving behind. I mean, it's
well,
not even the right word.
It cannot have new life, right? Because it takes both. And so you cannot become a new creation or new creature, right? You cannot unless both are present. And that's like what I've shared many times about the Kayutha, was just translated as beast, but it's also the same creatures that open the scrolls in Revelation chapter 7. So what is it? Are these the creatures that have access to the scrolls because they are the living scrolls, or is it a beast that we should be afraid of? Because it has the utha at the end. That suffix is so powerful because you've now connected to the divine feminine energy, which allows you to create from the place of the covenant and bring forth oneness through spirit breath. Like if people could just grasp the magnitude of what is being shared and take it into that place of meditation, like you were talking about earlier, and have that divine experience, because it's really mysticism, let's call it for a term that somebody would maybe comprehend. It's the I know, right? But those of us who have experienced it understand how tangible it is, and it wrecks the ego. It like demolishes the spiritual ego. And so when you were asking, can it be a servant? Absolutely it can, because it's the only way through that mysticism, through that divine experiential knowledge, that the ego can then be service to the creator. It's the only that we can come in and co-create with the creator is to diminish that spiritual ego, get into the place where we've been humbled because the presence is so overwhelming that we've entered into the Orita, and then we are now total and we have the ability to serve the Father.
Yeah. So, people ask all the time, when the subject of ego is probably the central point of confusion for the truth community.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And people want to be without ego. And I always tell them, no, you don't. Because if you didn't have smell, touch, all your senses, this density would suck. There's no other word. I mean, how would you experience this thing you call life? Even though that's not Haya. I mean, it is and it isn't. It's
right.
How would you experience the masculine part of Haya without all of your senses?
Right.
So you don't want to be ego-less. You just don't want the ego that has been your master. That's what you want to be without. Like I tell atheists all the time that say there is no God. And I'm like, well, yeah, I understand what you're saying. And in many ways, I would agree that the God that you've been shown, a lot of times I wouldn't want to follow either. I get that. But that's just the masculine. And once you introduce them to the feminine, and especially the feminine teaching of the one we call Jesus, and that's what I thank Alan Hoffman for all the time, because he was my introduction to truly understanding the feminine teaching. That his main emphasis, because he was in his form and in duality, he was in, you want to talk about a masculine dominant expression of consciousness. Holy cow. I mean, and he's trying to bring feminine into the understanding of people. And I always go back to the woman at the well. I think that's one of the coolest. My two favorite, I don't want to say favorites, but the woman at the well and the scribe conversation are two places that most evangelical or Orthodox Christians don't want to spend any time around. It's like, can't we just go to Paul and go down the Roman road and do the Paul thing? I'm like, no, let's back up and see what Jesus was talking about here. Because when you understand, like if you study the languages and the culture that go with the languages,
right,
and who the woman at the well was,
right,
and what they believed in their culture, and
right,
why she was at the well at the time of the day she was at the well, and if you think it was an accident that Jesus was there, you're not understanding anything. But it just recently something hit me, Carrie, that I'm still is an incubator about that conversation, because everybody wants to, yeah, she had 5 husbands. She wasn't married to the 6th, the man she was with now. And I'm like, and then the guy on your last video that says, Jesus didn't teach chakras, that's a cult. And I'm like, well, you think it's a coincidence that the woman at the well had 5 husbands, was with the 6th, and then the one she should be with would be the 7th, was right in front of her, and he's saying, if you had any idea who you were talking, you think that 7 number is a coincidence there? It's kind of, it's like I think there's more to that story there. I think it's
there's so much more.
Oh,
my goodness. I mean, because the number 7, we know the number 7, it's divine spiritual perfection. So you look at the 7 days of creation, right? And then the 8th is the new beginning. But it's also the letter Zayin. It's the sword and the plow, that is crucial to be connected to. And I think that part of that, and I want you to continue on, because I know I'll have somebody say that I'm interrupting you. But the part of that is so crucial is that when we are combating religious dogmas, when we are confronting cultural norms or biases, or especially masculine energy that has set this religious foundation and really into the spiritual ego and what can happen with that, with just the masculine energy, we have to allow the sword and the plow to come in to pierce us, right? It's like, it's interesting that the Vav would come before the sword and the plow, right? Because
Yep.
really an offense, and this is really, I wanted to go into this well, and I want you to continue talking about this with the intimacy and with, because I see this whole story with intimacy and transparency. I see this as being huge, and why people don't want to go into it, because it's so exposing of the shame and guilt that they carry within themselves. And especially the church structure, or not being able to answer questions, right? Not being able to provide the answers as people are seeking, because it touches raw nerves. It touches places of woundings and things that we just want to sweep under the carpet. You know, for someone to say, you know, I will be honest here. This is, my marriage to my husband is number 4 for me. So if you don't think that the woman, the well, didn't pierce me, or the religious system that said I couldn't share or I couldn't teach, or that I was damaged goods because I had been divorced 3 times prior, and God hates divorce, right? Doesn't realize what this is really saying, because there's, like you said, a much deeper level to it. And this sake of intimacy of what is really going on, and then getting into what that spiritual ego looks like and what forgiveness looks like. I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff going on here. So when we begin to confront the religious or the spiritual ego, this especially, because I would consider this as the spiritual ego, is what I would say is the beast ego, and not the Kayutha kind. I'm just one that is unruly, that thinks it's ruly but isn't. You know, it's because it's shackling the heart and going with religion. So with this beast ego and everything that's going on, when we confront individuals that are in that position, you know, it's hard for me to talk about these things, because automatically it's separation right here, because we're saying ego, we're saying spiritual ego. But yet when we're in the system of duality, we're looking at these things to see how we can unify it and bring it into oneness unity. But what will happen is when you come and you bring a truth to someone that has a very strong religious ego, some of these truths that are from the Orita will go straight and pierce their heart. It has to. You know, that's why that Vav is in the center of Or. It's like, it is meant to pierce your heart. And then that allows us, as your gift, as you shared in your first video about forgiveness, that totally just whacked me too. I mean, I had to go sit with that for a while. And I just revisited it again this morning, and I'm like, dang, that was so good, Steve. But piercing within is then either the sword or the plow that comes next.
Yep.
Because you got to break the fallow ground somehow, and it will be an offense that comes first when truth and when light and when love comes clearly as like this clarion call that comes in and cuts through all of the crap and the garbage that the spiritual ego cements around the heart. And it can't, there's no defense there. I mean, you try, the spiritual ego wants to, but my goodness, not when it's Orita.
Well, and that's why, I mean, I just laugh now because, you know, I'm just used to it. But, you know, when you bring a feminine truth into a masculine emotion, you get attacked personally. I mean, just, you know, and all, you know, you're deceiving people. You know, my God's going to burn you over coals like you're a marshmallow for eternity, and he's going to enjoy it. I'm like, but that's just what you get. And I mean, I get that, because that's what happens with unbridled religious masculinity. It just, that's why there's 35,000 denominations. It just, you know, that's what that happens until that collapses in upon itself, which is in the process of happening.
It is.